Because when we don't do what we are meant to do, then we get destroyed in many ways. On one hand, we are influenced easier by the destructive forces of the world. On the other hand, we release negative energies that feed the atmosphere, because there are cosmic radiation in the atmosphere which is negative. Even though we can turn it into positive, we can transform that energy. Now, when the accumulation of negative energy in the atmosphere exceeds a certain amount, then we have the catastrophes we are experiencing all over. That's a very interesting point, because right now, no one can deny something is happening in the world. Actually, I made a sort of long video about this subject in the other channel, in Armonía, in Spanish, showing pictures of what has happened in the village in which I'm living. There was a catastrophe here and in nearby villages, just as in other parts of Spain, also Greece, Turkey. There were heavy rains and hurricanes in the coast, and this brought not just floods but uncontrolled raising of the waters in rivers. Some rivers which were dried up, and water claimed its natural place, sweeping everything away. Our village is one of the places declared as catastrophic site, and I'm living right now in my sister's house with her husband as well, and we are in a place which is on the top part of the village, so we were not affected by the water. All the houses that became affected were built beside the river bend and even on the way of the water of the river. Obviously, most people never thought something like that could happen, because that place was dried up. And that is a demonstration of how people ignore very often the signs of nature, or stepmother nature, because nature went wild and unnatural many thousands of years ago, when certain architects made mistakes, and the outcomes have always been negative. But obviously, we have to respect how things came to be and understand the cycles, understand how nature works and how nature whips away anything which is not in tune with the natural cycles of equilibrium. And this has a lot to do with the soul. Since the human being is not releasing the positive energy that the atmosphere needs, there is an imbalance, and this imbalance of energies promote the formation of hurricanes, earthquakes, heavy rains. Nature demands a certain amount of energies, something which is known since ancient times, a wisdom that has been expressed through myths all throughout the world. And in ancient times, obviously, people were more aware, in one way or another, with more or less superstition. There were people that spoke of how the gods become angry, and the gods of storms releases heavy rains and lightning if people don't offer sacrifices of religious character. Obviously, that's a more naive way of seeing things, because things are a bit more complex and more logical and coherent in a sense, because the equilibrium in nature is required not just by the elements of nature. We play a part in all that, especially when we have more energetic potential as beings that have awareness and capacity of developing consciousness and listening to the voice of conscience, which is speaking of the laws of the universe. And if you remember, there is a passage in the New Testament where Master Yeshu addresses the multitudes and taking a coin showing the face of Caesar says, "Give Caesar what belongs to Caesar and give God what belongs to God," as it is translated, even though there can be different interpretations of that phrase. Because the word God can be expressed with different Hebrew and Aramaic words. Actually, if you go to the Aramaic version of the New Testament, the so-called Peshitta, you will find the expression "give Allah" or Allah. Allah means the Holy Source, obviously, the Father, or even before the Father, the primordial source from which the emanations known as Father and Son come. But Allah expresses all the richness throughout powers, forces known as Elohim, which are basically the forces operating in nature, or what we know as nature. Now, when Elohim become disconnected from the Holy Source, they become destructive. Whether they are beings, conscious beings, or forces, energies, dynamics. So, what Master Yeshu was implying is that we should give back all we are given. God, or the Holy Source, gives us love, mercy, supply of energy, life, so we should give back that to the world by developing our soul, as I said in the beginning. So give God what belongs to God, give Elohim what belongs to Elohim. Elohim are the forces of the universe, and this should be understood in context, because here in this planet, as I said, there is an imbalance, and this imbalance comes from catastrophic epochs, and we are required a function in this planet, which is the role of keepers, gardeners, the bringers of harmonia. And this is not possible if we don't develop our soul potential, if we don't transform negative energies to release positive energy. So Master Yeshu was speaking in a broad sense. Obviously, we should give Caesar what belongs to Caesar, because in this society we have to pay taxes, we have to follow certain rules which are not divine but have been imposed by the rulers in this society. And in order to be in peace, we should follow those rules to some extent, obviously, not just any rule, but we should also give our life, sharing our gifts, giving back to nature all the love and care it deserves, because we have been cared in a way, not just physically, but spiritually. Even though in this planet everything is a mess and most people are lacking roots spiritually, even if they are practicing some religion, they don't understand what masters like Yeshu taught. So they practice rituals blindly, thinking that an external savior is going to save them if they believe, or if they practice certain rituals as a form of complying with the demands of some god. Well, that's not how the universe works. What we are demanded are not blind laws, but natural ways of behaving that bring life. Doesn't matter what you call the process, doesn't matter if you believe in one religion or another. What matters is the development of consciousness, conscience, the development of your own virtues, so you can feed nature, harmonize nature, feed in a certain sense your divine essence, which comes from the Holy One, God if you wish, and therefore feed the soul at the same time. When we fulfill this growth, then we can bring harmony into this world. That's a way we can prevent catastrophes like this one we have been living. Obviously, when things like this happen, it seems people come together to help each other, become more compassionate, and it's very sad that something like this must happen so people become more compassionate and loving. But it seems people don't learn the lessons even after experiencing something like this. Why? Because they are asleep. They function in a completely mechanical way, especially when they don't have what I call the spiritual type of soul. Those of us who already have that more spiritualized soul with a mental body are constantly searching. There is a center of gravity in ourselves. It doesn't matter if we are sad or broken, we always come back to the inner search. And when we find, we want to share. That's why I started to speak, because I wanted to share something important I discovered, something without which I would be dead already. Physically dead, obviously, not spiritually dead, which is different. Because when you fail in the fulfillment of your mission, you become physically weaker and can suffer accidents or get caught by a catastrophe. And when you start fulfilling your mission, as some of us began to do, well, you overcome the obstacles. I went through a very difficult health process and I came stronger, wiser. I began to pay more attention to how I connect with my body, my emotions, my thoughts, how I eat, how I express myself, and all that obviously brought a different understanding of what's my responsibility. And the outcome is still evolving, growing. I have much to share, and this is what is keeping me alive. It doesn't mean, of course, I don't get sad when I see how the world is and how isolated can become souls in a world totally deceived by dark forces. Obviously, some of us, those of us more interested in inner growth, can become very isolated and lonely. That's why some of us are connecting or trying to connect with others. I have different students, I develop a course, and we exchange many of these impressions by whatever means. It can be WhatsApp or by a phone call, Zoom meeting, or an encounter somewhere, as we were gathering in the last few weeks in some remote location here in Spain. We were exploring the ancient ways of music therapy and Sufism. When this happens, a different energy is generated, and this helps the planet, the atmosphere. Energies that come from collective work are a blessing to a place, and they can prevent many catastrophes from taking place. If people really understood this, they wouldn't be so focused on the ways of the world. And of course, this doesn't mean going to a temple to pray for 30 minutes, 1 hour, and then behaving like a zombie for the rest of the day. as most people do when they are engaged in supposedly spiritual activities. This is something that requires total attention, total cultivation, connection with others, conscious connection, regardless of who they are or what they are expressing in a certain moment. Sometimes you have to endure the harshness of the world, and I have endured a lot since I was born. Lots of violence, disrespectful attitudes in many different contexts. I even played on the streets in Ireland, and I saw many things, and I suffered many things. And in that process, I became more patient, more non-reactive, and learned how to transform that negativity into something more embracing, understanding, because you cannot expect people to behave like true divine beings or beings of light when they are filled with deception, lies, brainwashing. It's not their fault in general. People are just victims, and each one of us has the potential to stop being the victim, stop considering oneself the victim, stop feeding the self-piteous soul that is filled with anger, resentment, disappointment. All that must be overcome in order to flow differently. And this doesn't mean we will not be sad at some point or disappointed by someone, by something. That's normal. But adding suffering to the suffering is what brings more problems. Unnecessary suffering is what we must avoid. We must make suffering something more intentional, as Mr. Gurdjieff, the master of dances, taught. He used that expression, intentional suffering, in reference to those situations that can be painful and make us suffer while we can't avoid them, and however we can turn them into something transformative. As Rumi said, make your pains become your blessings as well, because the crack is the place through which light comes in, or the wound is where love is going to be cultivated. There are no roses without thorns. All this subject of the painful longing of the soul is central in Sufi poetry, because you cannot separate the growth of the soul and darkness, pain. You cannot separate the evolution of understanding from a chaotic, catastrophic place like the planet in which we are living. And the catastrophes we are contemplating are the result of unconsciousness, as well as, well, the evil played in different parts of the world, because there are many institutions using science to generate clouds of rain in some parts, deprive other areas from rain, and they can also provoke earthquakes. All this is true. There are data about that. There are even programs which people are unconscious of, and they are operating in society, experiments that have been taking place with all sorts of climate changes and pandemias. Sometimes it's ridiculous, the arguments people are given. They say that they are spreading the air with chemtrails because they are fighting the climate change, so they have to keep the sun rays from coming in. But the sun rays are necessary, they are an expression of consciousness, even though they are killing the body in a sense. But the problem is not the sun. Actually, the earth is meant to fuse with the sun in the long future. All the planets are aspects of the sun in a sense. The whole personality is being generated to become an even greater expression of light. But obviously here there are forces of darkness that fight against the growth of consciousness, and they can promote as well the catastrophes we are seeing by different means. One is by keeping people asleep, and governments claim to be fighting the problem with poverty, with water scarcity, with wars, with climate change, but all that are just lies, since most of the central governments in Europe, US, and other parts have companies that live at the expense of poverty, war, scarcity. So the reasons they may give to implement certain measures, in most cases, are just strategies for deviating the attention of people. Therefore, the only way we can escape the global depression and deception is by growing inside. Regardless of the situation, don't blame the world darkness, because in reality, all depends on our initiative. Something must grow from within by developing the potential against the current, so to say. We cannot develop consciousness and will without some opposition. Now, it's possible to fall in the way, and we will fall many times. But as Rumi said, don't worry if you fail 100 or 1,000 times. Come over and over again. Remember that longing that you feel for a wholeness, don't conform yourself with mediocrity. Aspire to something greater, because the whole universe is speaking within you. Actually, you are not a drop from the ocean. You are the whole ocean in a drop. Don't believe those people who say that you are a sinner, an animal, someone without value. No, your real self is full of value, because it's an expression of the Holy One. When we give value to what we really are, then we can really do something valuable. If we fall into self-deprecation, accusation, into a lack of real esteem, self-esteem, then we will fall, and we will be filled by all the destruction and negativity that have poisoned religion, spirituality, art. In our society, there are almost no expression of true art, because art should be a means to bring more consciousness, more creativity, growth of life, of loving transformation. And the so-called art nowadays, and in many other epochs, have been used for deception. So I invite you to be an exception, just as many of us are being the exception. We don't feel very much supported. That's something that you will have to deal with. We feel attacked in many ways or misunderstood, but at least we are being authentic. We are not being puppets or people carried by the unconscious and mechanical streams of society and control nature. Therefore, as I don't want to make the video any longer, I just remind you there is a blog known as themusicofwisdom.blogspot.com, the Song of Reality. I will be leaving amazing phrases by Rumi, the Persian poet that has become an inspiration for me and many others. He expresses many of the self-realizing truths that issue came to bring. There is a lot of synchronicity between what Rumi said and the demonstration brought by the Nazarene master issue. There is another channel called Vital en Armonía, and also one in Spanish, En Armonía. You can use the subtitles in English if you are interested in some documentaries and other videos I publish there. And there is also a web, Vital en Armonía. I offer courses of inner growth, inner development, of assessment. There are courses on holistic psychotherapy, holistic medicine, using the way we eat, the way we understand our body. I also teach lessons on how to use the voice, the musical instruments, music as a form of therapy. I'm also developing certain inspirational concerts or music therapy sessions. So I'm here at your disposal. Thank you very much for listening with attention. Remember, there is a responsibility to respond before the world with all the light we carry within. Because as we read in one of the sayings of Master Ishu, gathered by Thomas in his testament, if you don't develop what is within you will destroy you. But if you bring forth what is inside you, all your potential, what you have inside will save you. So it's that life that comes from us, the true agent of salvation, not an external entity or God. And having said this, let's keep cleaning heart, mind, and body so we can express the love without limits, life without obstruction, integral conscience, and deep, blissful serenity.